We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today, 2nd District Congressman Joe Courtney joins us to answer our questions and yours. He's been a member of Connecticut's Congressional delegation since 2007. He's a senior member of the House Armed Services and Education and Workforce Committees. If you live in the 2nd District and have a question for Congressman Courtney, you can join us too. Here's the number, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Representative Joe Courtney joins us on Zoom today. Congressman, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Lucy. Thank you for the invitation. It's been a while.
It has been. And just for full transparency, so your district covers mostly eastern Connecticut, but technically you're my congressman too. I live up in Suffield, so you have a few towns in that north central area as well.
Yeah, no, it's I continually remind my colleagues that they have it pretty easy geographically, but yeah, it's very sprawling, very diverse, and keeps you on your toes.
Now, later on in the show, we're going to hear from Julia Bergman, who's a politics reporter for Hearst, Connecticut media. Representative Courtney, I wanted to start with talking about what happened at the U.S. Capitol on Friday. One police officer there killed, another injured after a man ran through a barricade. This follows, of course, the riot back in January when supporters of then President Donald Trump tried to disrupt the ceremonial counting of Electoral College votes. When you heard about what happened to Officer William Evans, what was your reaction?
To be honest with you, there was a pit in my stomach because, obviously we interact with the Capitol Police, on a continual basis every single day. And I just would say that, the trauma of January 6th, where over 140 Capitol Police officers were injured, and some of them really seriously. The Justice Department just indicted another rioter who is charged with basically grabbing one of the cops and dragging him down the steps during the hours-long conflict that was going on there. And a lot of them are experiencing post-traumatic stress. A lot of them are, having trouble coming back to work every day. A lot of them are, basically starting to ask themselves, is this really what I signed up for? And to have this happen again, where, again, an individual just out of nowhere, for no good, no reason, just attacked and killed one of the force, and another one injured. I'm going back down next week, and I know there's again a post-traumatic stress disorder phenomenon that's going here, and this thing was, we were starting to feel like it was a little bit back to the normal rhythm down there, and to have this happen is just really heartbreaking. And we've got more work to do in terms of making that place safe, not just for the people who work there, but also the people who protect the Capitol.
Representative Courtney, when you head down to Washington, do you feel safe in the Capitol complex?
It's funny. If you had asked me that question a year ago, I would tell you that, in terms of evaluating risk, the Capitol always seemed like the safest place of all. And because I think that we do have a really professional group of people. There's obviously lots of equipment. And the district office, which is, a little bit less hardened, in terms of protection, is where I was, frankly, always a little bit more concerned. The Capitol obviously lost its luster in terms of being sort of a completely sort of safe haven. And, I think we're all getting briefed up about, paying attention to what's in our surroundings. The fencing and the perimeter obviously looks a lot different. And I know there's probably going to be some modifications since we left town about 2 weeks ago in terms of the razor wire coming down. But the answer is, that place is still very much a target for a lot of, some people who are disturbed individuals, or some people who, just sort of are in this. And it's a small group, I think, but have this sort of perception of, the Capitol being sort of a place where, they lost their rights and their power, and feel, basically that, using even violence as a way to sort of push back against that is, acceptable. And so that's why I think, there's a lot of work being done in terms of just how we try to balance access to the Capitol, which I, in my heart still believes is so important in a democracy, with obviously making sure that the people who work there are safe.
John's calling in from Madison with a question. Go ahead, John. John from Madison, go ahead with your question.
Yes, hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering if, picking up on Representative Courtney's idea of the police force wondering if they had signed up for this, if maybe up until now this has been sort of a police assignment light, and that they are now starting to consider to leave because they haven't been prepared for this psychologically, haven't been really trained for it adequately.
So, I mean, look, I think, there was actually a report that was released that just kind of did a complete soup to nuts inventory of the training and capacity of the Capitol Police Force. And there's definitely weaknesses that Congress and the leadership have to address. So, I think your point is well taken, that I think that there was some complacency. I think the numbers of police were allowed to really slide, and that needs to be addressed. I would say, though, that people really, again, have to recognize January 4th was just January 6th was an event that defied any, I think, expectation in terms of the amount of violence that took place that day. It's the largest number of first responders injured since 9/11. Obviously, one individual, Brian Sitnick, lost his life that day. Two took their own lives afterwards, and I think it's pretty clear that it was the trauma and stress that they sadly and tragically couldn't cope with. There needs to be an all hands on deck approach here. The Justice Department, I think, in terms of the prosecutions and the coordination now with the Department of Homeland Security, in terms of just trying to recognize the fact that there are new groups out there that feel very empowered to use violence as a political tool. That is something that you cannot deny is real. That's happening out there. It's tricky stuff. The First Amendment protects people's rights to be as angry verbally and as at politicians and government. That's the crown jewel, I think, of our country. But there's no question that January 6th showed that the new normal, that can't be the new normal. We have to recognize that that this process that takes place in the Capitol Dome is not just sort of cable TV talk show stuff. I mean, it's real, and we saw it with the American Rescue Plan. That's enactment, and a couple of other bills that gets overlooked even just in the last few weeks or so for veterans. Real life decisions are being made there, and we've got to make sure that continues to function in a way that's safe.
I wanted to follow up with political reporting that there was about 233 vacancies within the U.S. Capitol Force, hundreds more on the brink of retirement, according to its union, another 36 facing internal investigations for their own actions during the January 6th chaos. Earlier, Congressman, you said that you feel like this building is a target for some people. And so I'm wondering, with the National Guard once there to protect the Capitol, leaders of the House Armed Services Committee, which I believe you're a member of, called for the removal of the National Guard from the Capitol. Given what happened last Friday, should they remain there?
Well, I was not part of that group, and right now we actually have, I believe, it's 1,000 or so from the Massachusetts Army National Guard that are, the group that's there, and I've talked to quite a few of them. We talked Red Sox and sports and where you're from in New England, et cetera. And, I get it that, having a sort of militarized presence at the Capitol is something that people are very uncomfortable with. I actually think that, they have been really quite, they have done their best to keep as low a profile as they possibly can. And I think, again, the event that took place last Friday, I think that, there's going to be probably some pumping of the brakes, because you're absolutely right, Lucy. The number of Capitol Police officers, I think right now we're going to experience a downward trajectory. And, how do you balance that in terms of, the threat level that I think is still real that's out there? I mean, at some point you need boots on the ground, literally.
You're hearing Representative Joe Courtney again. He's the congressman for the 2nd Congressional District. You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I want to talk about the submarine force, but first, Jim's calling in from Newtown. Jim, go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Since you had introduced the show on an economic note, I just wanted to ask Representative Courtney, sir, do you support the increase to 28% in the corporate tax rate that Biden has proposed? And what can this country do to counter the long-term trend towards a plutocracy, really, and this terrible undermining of the middle class? And when we compare, taxation rates back to Republican Eisenhower, the differences there, I think that I wonder if you could speak to a path forward to creating more income opportunity. And I noticed that NPR has been running a couple segments on guaranteed basic income, which is an interesting idea, which I had not known a lot about. Do you support that? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure. Well, thank you. Again, the infrastructure proposal that the president put out, I think, responsibly has pay-fors included in it. And as you point out, raising the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28% in the wake of the Trump tax bill, which I think cut the rate far too low from 35 to 21%. I think raising it to 28 is reasonable. And I think it's important also to recognize, as you probably know, that the corporate tax rate in terms of what a lot of corporations actually pay is not necessarily the same number. So, for example, a corporation that is using tax credits for things like research and development, their real net corporate tax payment is not going to be 21% under the present law, or 28 if Biden gets his way and I get my way. The true net tax rate for a lot of companies is still going to be far lower because of a whole range of other tax credits that still are in the tax code and were not removed when the Trump tax plan was enacted back in 2017. That proposal, I do think, is part of an effort to sort of rebalance who pays in terms of initiatives like the infrastructure bill, which I think will in fact broaden prosperity for middle class and working families in this country. I think that there's just no question that investing in traditional infrastructure, which is the transportation stuff and roads and bridges, some of the I think wider proposals in terms of infrastructure, whether it's rebuilding America's decrepit schools, housing infrastructure, which is included in the Biden plan, electrification, strengthening the grid, which is more, in my opinion, of a 21st century vision of infrastructure, again, I think is all about broadening prosperity in a way that I think would be very healthy for our society and also our democracy.
In this $2.3 trillion, again, infrastructure plan, there's also a proposal to boost broadband, which I know in Connecticut, especially in areas like in your district, Congressman, residents have trouble having reliable internet, and this has become a problem, especially in the pandemic. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, again, when we talk about infrastructure, broadband, which didn't exist, really 20, 25 years ago, now is legitimately deserving of being part of an infrastructure conversation. If you're, an economic development official in a small town in eastern Connecticut, which is the more rural, obviously, part of the state, or, let's broaden the the Zoom here and go into the Midwest or rural communities. If you don't have reliable internet service, you're not going to get economic development. Period. Full stop. I mean, it's just not going to happen. What's interesting with COVID is that people are now saying how living outside of cities, whether it's suburbs or rural areas, is now a lot more attractive, which is definitely real. That's happening out there. But for more rural parts of the country, they cannot take advantage of that sort of new post-COVID, possibilities unless they have reliable broadband and internet services. So I think this is something that, again, unfortunately, Mitch McConnell and Roy Blunt, who's a great guy, I've worked with Senator Blunt on a bunch of issues here, but they've sort of dismissed that as not real infrastructure. I mean, that is just incredibly short-sighted to take that type of position. Lastly, I would just say, dealing with, trying to keep kids connected to schools, having reliable broadband, again, it's not a fluffy luxury item. It's really critical. And we know that there's parts of my district that really suffered because of lack of reliable Wi-Fi, having even just the equipment to connect to the learning in schools. And we've taken a hit in terms of learning loss during this pandemic. And again, I think the president's proposal on broadband, as well as the school funding, which is, encompasses some of that initiative, I think is critically important as we try to pivot from this recession.
Again, you're hearing Congressman Joe Courtney here on Where We Live. If you have a question for him, especially if you live in the 2nd Congressional District, here's the number, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We'll be back after a short break. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. My guest today is Representative Joe Courtney of the 2nd Congressional District. You can join us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Congressman, you chair the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee. During your time as Congressman, you focused on increasing submarine production. This is a manufacturing sector that contributes a lot to Connecticut's economy, also a significant workforce at Electric Boat in Groton. I understand that there are plans to hire about 1,100 people this year at EB. More than half of them will be engineers. So let's talk about what's driving this hiring trend.
Sure. So again, I think for a lot of people who are in the southeastern Connecticut region, I think they understand the long history of Electric Boat, which goes back about 120 years. It is a very unique work that's done there in terms of building a highly complex platform, which right now is in the highest of demand by the U.S. Navy. Again, just to put it in context, because understandably, a lot of people don't follow this maybe as closely as I do. But at the end of the Cold War, there was roughly about 100 attack submarines in the fleet. There clearly was not as strong a need by any stretch. After the Cold War came to an end. And the legacy fleet that was in existence then is steadily and with increasing velocity being retired because they were building them back in the 70s and 80s at roughly a clip of 4 to 5 a year. We went down to 1 a year for quite a while in this country in the 90s and early 2000s. Starting in 2011, we have again restored a build rate of 2 a year, which we do collaboratively with the shipyard down in Virginia. When that process started, the workforce down there was roughly about 7,000 or 8,000. Today, it's over 17,000. Again, I just want to emphasize, we're talking about recapitalizing a fleet which has gone from 100 down to 50 today, and is going to continue to go down in the 2020s into the 40s. However, at the same time, we have Navy commanders in the Indo-Pacific region in the Atlantic who right now it is their highest demand in terms of, what submarines bring to the table in terms of deterrence, intelligence gathering, et cetera. So as I said, the demand is very high from the Navy. A contract was signed about a year and a half ago for 9 subs. in the attack program, which would have broken the two per year cadence that's been in existence since 2011. There was an option to restore a 10th boat, as it's called, and we were successful in the last Congress. Again, my subcommittee led the way. I can say, I think, perfectly accurately in terms of finding a budget offsets to accomplish that fact. So about 3 weeks ago, the Navy signed a contract for that 10th boat, which now means that the backlog of work at EB is about $39 billion, which is the biggest number in the history of the company. So the hiring, as you point out, Lucy, is continuing. Back in January, EB did a legislative breakfast, which they do every year. They were projecting about 900 new hires for Groton. As you point out, that number now has grown to 1,100. We had the acting secretary of the Navy in Groton on Monday, who toured the facility down there, which is always for first timers, kind of an eye-watering event. And again, I think got the message that the 2 per year cadence is really incredibly important to maintain the stability of the workforce, because the work that's done there in terms of metal trades and engineering, as you point out, you can't sort of walk off the street and do that. And if you have sort of peaks and valleys in terms of production, that creates a lot of instability, which is very difficult to recover. So, we're waiting. The Biden administration obviously has a new team in charge, and the budget is probably going to be coming out sometime in May. It looks like at the point, which is kind of late, but again, it was a very, unfortunately, very choppy transition with the prior administration not really working with Secretary Austin and his team. But we're still having these visits up to Connecticut, like the acting secretary, to really, again, see firsthand the great work that's being done and the fact that workforce stability, I think justifies continuing the build rate, which is now all sort of incorporated in that contract backlog that I just described.
I mean, certainly these contracts and this work that's being done, again, is good for Connecticut's economy, employing many people. But when we think about the wars that have been fought over the last 2 decades, the emphasis now on cybersecurity, when you see foreign people hacking our federal government, interfering with our U.S. elections, is this the kind of resources that our government should continue to be spending when we think about the future of cybersecurity and protecting our country, Congressman?
So again, the defense bill that was signed into law, actually, it wasn't signed into law. We did it by a veto override. Trump vetoed it, which was kind of incredible. But we had a very bipartisan majority to override the veto. Included actually very strong new initiatives on cyber, and you're absolutely right, that is incredibly important. But I would also note that, if you just read the news in just the last few days in terms of what's happening in the Indo-Pacific region, where China now has the largest navy in the world, 355 ships, bigger than the U.S. is 270. They are behaving in international waters in a way that is just completely and totally illegal. The UN has completely rejected their claims of territorial control, and allies, whether it's Australia, Philippines, etc., are doing their best, and they're, I think, very anxious to make sure that they have a partner there. No one wants to start a war, and as I said, submarines bring to the table the one survivable asset platform that the Chinese missile technology has not figured out. And it is, in my opinion, a stabilizer in terms of making sure that the tension, which is rising there, that is undeniable. And Secretary Blinken, when he met with the Chinese foreign minister, completely, I think, unsolicited and unnecessary, attitude that was coming from the foreign minister, accusing the U.S. of aggressive behavior, which is, all the U.S.'s position is we want basically rule of law and freedom of navigation, period, which is good for everybody in terms of trade and peaceful relations. And again, I would just say that, you can make an argument that there are frankly some legacy platforms in the Navy, surface ships, that are very vulnerable right now in terms of China's advances in terms of missile technology, but the submarine provides, as I said, the one sort of, survivable asset that I think really rebalances, the I think very aggressive posture that's happening out there. Putin quickly has been engaging in a lot of other lawless behavior there. About a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, they seized Ukrainian Navy ships in international waters. Again, UN completely, totally found them guilty of violating the navigation rules, and they imprisoned the crews in Moscow. Again, totally, flagrantly illegal. And I think that we have to remember history here. Is that navigation, freedom of navigation is a flashpoint when countries are trying to exercise extra legal claims of control of passage of ships, and that is a really, we've succeeded so well since the end of World War II in terms of avoiding that kind of stuff that sometimes I think people have gotten complacent about the need to have a credible international collaborative effort to keep our international waters free of claims of power, which is really what's happening in the Indo-Pacific region and in the European area of operations.
You're hearing 2nd District Congressman here on Where We Live. Representative Joe Courtney is here to answer your questions too. 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Another industry especially important in the southeast corner is what's been happening with casino gambling over the decades. We now know Connecticut has a deal with the 2 tribes in Connecticut to expand gambling to allow online sports betting. This is now needing approval not only by our state legislature, but the Bureau of Indian Affairs on the federal level. So what can you tell us about this process and why this expansion is needed?
So again, both tribal casinos operate under a federal law, the National Native American Gaming Act. And so when the casinos were first established in southeastern Connecticut, both Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods, again, it was part of a government-to-government compact, which is what basically the Gaming Act sort of sets up. When that was created and executed, there was no such thing as sports gaming. That was completely against the law. And the Supreme Court, about 2 years ago, Murphy versus NCAA, struck down that restriction, which again has now opened up sports gaming. States like New Jersey and others, pounced the minute that ruling came down. Connecticut, again, has been involved in a pretty protracted process, which finally, I think, is looking like it's going to come together. Because of an agreement Governor Lamont negotiated with both tribes. We had a big announcement in Norwich about a couple weeks ago to sort of foot stomp, that milestone. The legislature has to pass this arrangement, and then it goes, as you point out, straight to the Department of Interior, where Secretary Deb Haaland, can review the new arrangement. Again, they've got about 60 days to make a decision. And I'm pretty bullish that we're going to get support from the Department of Interior. There was a pretty weird episode that took place under the Trump administration where the prior sort of agreement involving East Windsor, was basically derailed by the secretary at the time, who was communicating with senators and members of Congress from Nevada, because MGM, I think it's pretty well understood, had a strong interest in terms of not letting that happen to affect the Springfield. None of that kind of drama surrounds where I think we are today with Connecticut. And again, I think certainly myself, and I'm sure the whole delegation will strongly support Lamont and the legislatures and the tribal nations agreement that they've hammered out.
What will this mean for people who are struggling with gambling addiction now that it will be so accessible when this is all approved to just bet on your cell phone that's in your pocket, Congressman?
Well, it's a serious problem, and sports gaming, as you point out, particularly if you can do it on your phone, is something that I think adds a layer of problem and intensity to this issue that's there. I would say that, number one, the tribes contribute a substantial amount of money to Connecticut's gaming behavioral health programs. And I think with sports gaming, this was talked about in Norwich the day the agreement was announced, that this is going to have to be really, I think, boosted to make sure that people are aware of the issues. That we've got to make sure technology is put in place to try and limit young people, particularly from using this new venue. But I would just say that right now, that we're in a situation where states around us are all moving in this direction, and I would rather have a situation in Connecticut where we have more control than just sort of letting people find their way to sports gaming through other less, I think, responsible outlets than the tribes. I mean, they really get this, and I think if you had Chairman Butler or Chairman Gasick, on from both tribes, they would be very vocal in terms of expressing their commitment to addressing that problem.
Again, you can join our conversation with Congressman Joe Courtney, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We spent a lot of time on this show talking about Connecticut's strategy to roll out vaccines to all of its residents. There have been widespread disparities when we look at people of color in our state and the lack of access in the beginning. It's starting to get better with more pop-up clinics and not having to make appointments. But I'm wondering, when we're thinking about people in our rural towns, Congressman Courtney, how has Connecticut been doing in getting the vaccine to them?
So I think your description that we're getting better is the way I would characterize it. The mass vaccination sites, which were a very sort of efficient way to get big numbers initially, didn't work so well for people. Particularly people, even, elderly groups trying to get up to Rensselaer Field. Over time, I think we're seeing a lot more outreach in terms of some of the smaller towns. I come from Vernon, which I have to give the hometown shout out to the mayor and the town manager, who have done a really good job of not just doing stuff in Vernon, which is, somewhat of a suburban town close to Hartford. But just a couple of days ago, there was a vaccination clinic at Oak Ridge Farms in Ellington, which is the largest dairy farm in New England. And the workforce there, which again, a lot of them are migrant workers, were able to get their shots that they otherwise, I think, would have really struggled to get to. The federally qualified health centers are also just got some federal funding through the rescue plan to boost vaccine clinics in places like Plainfield, some of the other smaller towns that are happening out there. Foxwoods and Mohegan both have also stood up drive-throughs, which again is a little closer to Eastern Connecticut, but the Quiet Corner in particular, places like Plainfield and Generations Health Center, which is up in that region there. I think, that's where that funding, which again just arrived a couple of weeks ago, is so important to make sure that people up there don't get sort of left behind. Because, it's the tyranny of distance when you talk about, parts of Eastern Connecticut where, the interconnection to interstates, there's virtually no mass transit. It's hard for people to just sort of find a way to get to the vaccines that we obviously want to get done as quickly as possible.
Were you hearing from constituents that were having trouble in the eastern part of our state?
Absolutely. I did telephone town halls, and definitely people were just saying, Rensselaer Field was just not an option for them, because of either lack of transportation, and what are we going to do about getting help? So in Enfield, they worked with Johnson Memorial Hospital, which is kind of a rural hospital up in Stafford there, to set up a vaccination program at Fermi High School. And again, the pop-ups have definitely been happening. By the way, I would point out the VA, because we have the highest concentration of veterans in the state. They have done a remarkably good job. They, again, have their own system of vaccination that's separate from the state of Connecticut. And they have been doing pop-ups. And, down Waterford and New London. And, I'm proud to say that the Connecticut VA healthcare system is number 2 in the country in terms of VA healthcare systems, in terms of the vaccination rates that they've been able to accomplish. I mean, it's really, and it's because of leadership. They've just done a really smart, good job of just getting it out there.
Again, you can join us. Congressman Courtney's with us for just a few more minutes, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. The Biden administration Secretary of Energy recently announced plans to expand offshore wind farms along the East Coast over the next 2 decades. We know there's a major project underway in New London to rebuild State Pier as a base for the construction of offshore wind turbines. Can you talk more about this agreement between New London and these companies and how it will impact southeastern Connecticut and our energy choices in the future, Congressman?
Yeah, I think, what the Biden announcement at the end of March signaled is that, they are completely committed 1,000% to expand renewable energy, and offshore wind is going to be a huge part of that. And clearly, from on the East Coast, really from Maine all the way down to Virginia, you're going to see these towers going up. And the decision to locate a wind turbine assembly facility at State Pier, which has really been a state asset that for as long as I've been in Congress has really struggled in terms of really getting the true potential of operations there, I think is got elevated as a result of that announcement by the Biden administration. So, I was definitely involved in helping Mayor Passero get what I think was a really obvious need for a fair arrangement, which we succeeded in terms of the annual payments that Ørsted and Eversource are going to pay to the city. Again, it's tax exempt parcel, and that's always been New London struggle down there. But that combined with the fact that we were able to protect the rail line that runs from the pier all the way up to Vermont, access to other forms of cargo. Again, that was a federal project which we got funding for, and my office was very deeply involved in that a number of years ago. The rail line was over 100 years old and couldn't really do much weight bearing in terms of cargo. So we were able to preserve that rail access. And lastly, the Crosstown Ferry, which is part of that intermodal, really exciting, potential that New London had been actually blockaded when the first version of the wind project, when it first was released. We were able to, again, get them to rearrange the footprint so Crosstown Ferry can continue to do, again, its ferry service. So, it's change, and there's definitely people who are frustrated that, we're not able to, accommodate every single user that would like to have access to the pier. But I do think, the Biden announcement really shows that, this is going to be a big change, which for Connecticut, I think is ultimately very positive. We're a user of energy primarily in terms of fossil fuels, and having, wind power now, that's going to get pumped into our grid directly to power hundreds of thousands of homes, I think is a real change in terms of just the whole sort of, structure of our economy and of, obviously the environmental benefits are enormous as well. So, lastly, there's some companies that are who specialize in undersea technology. Thayer Mahan was part of the announcement that took place at the end of March that's getting some contracts from the Department of Energy. These are ex-submariners. Admiral Mike Connor, who was a 3-star, is the CEO of that company. He's a former admiral, and they bring to the table the ability to have undersea platforms that can back the cable lines that connect the towers to the grid, as well as help, with marine life tracking to keep it safe out there, and also to help with navigation to help our fishermen that are out there. And again, You don't find a workforce like that in many parts of America, but you can in Connecticut because of this unique history that we have with the submarine industry.
There's a lot of potential, but the cost of the State Pier project continues to grow. The state's going to have to pay a majority of that amount, about 120 million. There's also questions about the Connecticut Port Authority. Do you have confidence in the authority's ability to get this done?
So look at, I've been around when it was before the Port Authority, and the State Department of Transportation was, basically managing that property, and they were not doing a very good job. Senator Andy Maynard was the guy who introduced the legislation creating the Port Authority. I would just say that they had tremendous growing pains, and I think every decision should be public and transparent and held to account. And I think that we're all accountable. But I do think that in terms of the partners that they're bringing in, Ørsted is a company that does wind energy in Europe and has a very strong background in terms of knowing what they're doing. As I said, we had to hammer them and the parties to get a fair arrangement for the city of New London, which again was neglected the first go around in terms of the deal that was put on the table. So again, I think that a lot of the criticism that's come in to the Port Authority has been healthy. I think dealing with the rail line, dealing with Crosstown Ferry, dealing with a host city agreement that's better for the city, and bringing to bear all the transparency and freedom of information that the law provides. I mean, I think everyone knows this is something that we're all going to be watching like a hawk, and the Port Authority I think understands that. There's some new leadership that's there, but as I said, at the end of the day, it's a quasi-public, and I would emphasize more the public side of things in terms of making sure that they perform their job.
We'll have to leave it there. Again, Congressman Joe Courtney, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lucy. Take care.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we'll get some context on what we've talked about with the Congressman. Julia Bergman joins us, politics reporter for Hearst, Connecticut Media. You can join us too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We just heard from 2nd District Congressman Joe Courtney. Joining us now with some more context behind the topics we discussed, Julia Bergman joins us, politics reporter for Hearst, Connecticut Media. Julia, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Lucy.
You were a longtime reporter for the Day of New London. You've covered Congressman Courtney for many years. We spent a good time talking about the electric boat and the value of this, again, providing submarines to benefit our national security. I'm curious if you can talk more about some of the energy and effort that's going on down there in manufacturing with this tube subcontract.
Yeah, I think there was a recognition pretty early on when EB got one of the first sort of these big contracts that we needed the workforce, right? I think the congressman mentioned that really we're talking about a level of production that hasn't existed since the Cold War, and that means the workforce had also shrunk, but also it's an aging workforce with a lot of retirements each year. And, the need for new people to come in and learn these skills, which, in a lot of cases are obviously very highly proficient. We're talking about, types of welding jobs that are very, specialized. And so I think early on, there was a recognition by stakeholders in the community and particularly the Workforce Investment Board in this area that there needed to be programs and pipelines set up in order to train the level of people that was needed, that it wasn't going to be able, electric boat wasn't going to be able to do it on its own, essentially, hire all these people and train them.
So is there any challenge with finding this new workforce when we think about manufacturing skills?
Yeah, I think, to a certain degree, it's there is, I think a lot of it is about, making sure that people are aware of these programs. In many cases, students now in high school and even middle school and in this area and beyond are being talked to about these job opportunities, and kind of letting them know what they are. And you're seeing in a lot of the technical high schools in particular and some of the community colleges, specific programs, catered towards these jobs at electric boats. So I think it's more at this point about sort of letting people know that these jobs exist, and getting them connected with these programs. And in some cases it's people coming out of high school or college, but in other cases it's people who are, doing a career change, right? Or maybe they've been underemployed for a period of time for whatever reason, and are looking kind of to get a job in an industry that right now is fairly stable and is, providing good wages.
I'd mentioned Congressman Courtney's been in this role since 2007. The second district encompasses a lot of different towns, but would you say this is one of the most important issues that any representative needs to focus on, is protecting this industry and the jobs associated with it, Julia?
Yeah, I think, it's a real economic driver for this area. And it's been that way for a little while now. I mean, I think it's important to point out that this is all subject to congressional approval, right? So right now, in recent years, we've had a Congress that has appropriated money for these submarine programs, but certainly there has been, events in the past. History has shown us that, if sort of the national security picture in the U.S. or the world changes, that Congress can choose to divert this funding somewhere else or cut it. But certainly, yeah, I think that a lot of people see the contracts coming into EB as opportunities for jobs for people in this region. But I think it's also important to point out how much money we're talking about here. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of taxpayer money. For example, EB is the prime contractor for a new program to build 12 ballistic missile submarines. And that program is estimated to cost 110 billion, with a B, obviously, dollars. So that's a huge investment.
Again, we're hearing Julia Bergman, who's covered Congressman Courtney for many years. She now works for Hearst, Connecticut media. We spent a little time talking about the state pier, again, what offshore wind will be looking like, hopefully, in the next few decades. It has been interesting to hear Congressman Courtney say, with all of the scrutiny towards the Port Authority, moving forward, they'll be watched like a hawk. Will that be enough, Julia?
I certainly hope so. I think there were a lot of lessons that the state legislature here learned about, forming these quasi-public agencies, which is what the Connecticut Port Authority is, which has, oversight over a lot of that, oversight here, and maybe how much sort of freedom they unintendedly gave these quasi-public agencies, or, realizing that some of the laws that created these agencies maybe didn't account for or have, strong enough controls in place. But, I think a lot of regular, people in the general public are watching, and there's been a lot of pressure from, kind of just citizens and obviously people who would be, affected by, the development here. And so I think that's important as well for the general public to have buy-in here and to, pay attention to what's going on.
We'll have to leave it there. Julia Bergman, again, a politics reporter for Hearst, Connecticut media. Thank you, Julia, for coming on.
Thanks so much, Lucy. Have a good one.
Today's show produced by Matt Dwyer. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We'll be back tomorrow.